Ian, thanks for making time this afternoon to do this series of interviews with me. One of the things which I've been saying about aviation is the problem is not flying, the problem is the pollution that comes from the fuel from the aircraft flying around because it burns kerosene. How do you see the future of that? What do we do about the pollution that aircraft cause, the contribution they make to greenhouse gases and global warming, so that we can continue to fly? What do you think the solution is?
I would just change the frame a little bit and not just think of it as pollution, but just emissions. And it's taking all of those emissions and seeing if we can do something useful with them and making sure that none of the emissions do anything that has a detrimental effect for anybody else or other parts of the planet.
Right.
So discharging unburnt hydrocarbons at high level or discharging CO2 at a high level, we know helps contribute to that greenhouse effect. So if what we can do is to absorb those emissions from the aircraft, capture them or condense them and capture them, bring them back onto the ground, and with sunlight or some other added energy, produce that back into a synthetic fuel to allow us to fly again, that gives us that circular economy that is sustainability without damage to the environment, because we are capturing, reusing all the time, reuse, recycle, and we're not disposing.
So how realistic is this? How far away from being able to do this might we be with enough investment?
There's been a project at Loughborough University for about 10 years now on the synthetic fuels. So that's, rather than pumping CO2 underground, is pumping the CO2 into a catalytic bed with sunlight and converting that into a synthetic methane.
Right.
And then combining that through another catalyst into a longer chain hydrocarbon, which will do as a biofuel. So we're a little way off from that. There's, as a side part of that project is effectively farming algae, and a bit like you make potato wine, is taking the algae and making wine out of it to get an industrial alcohol, and using the alcohol as a lightweight hydrocarbon for synthetic fuel. And what that's trying to do is to get that circular economy going. The bit of the equation that's currently difficult, and that is putting the big bag at the back of the engine to capture the CO2 and condense it down into something that we can carry back down to the ground. But we do that with other things on the aircraft. So for instance, we put clean water onto the aircraft, it passes through our toilets or through the kitchen into a different tank, which we bring back with us.
Yeah.
So if you think of your fuel tank as passing through the engines to provide the propulsive power, and then whatever we condense the CO2 into goes into a different tank, which we bring back down to the ground for reprocessing. So it's just a matter of thinking that circular economy as part of the aircraft.
And seeing how much of that you can deliver without too much weight, presumably.
That's correct, yes. What it means is that your takeoff and your landing weights are probably going to be very similar.
Yeah. Is that a problem in aeronautical terms?
Only if you've overfilled your aircraft.
Right.
Puts a lot more pressure on the brakes if you're landing with a full load.
Right.
Especially if the runway's wet.
Well, that's fascinating, Ian. Let's hope that something comes soon to improve the efficiency of aviation. It's interesting to me that there are clearly so many different possibilities.